In today's video, we're going to talk about how you take a SharePoint list item using automation, such as this one here. Here's all the different steps that we're going to cover in today's video. Use this automation to create a Word document or a PDF, and also prevent the creation of duplicates for this. And we'll also talk about some other things related to moving these documents over. But if you want to create a PDF, this video is going to show you how to do that. Or if you just want to create a Word document, again, this video is going to show you how to do all of this as part of today's video. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, there are three primary steps that we have to have prepared in order to actually get this process moving. The first is a SharePoint list, and in this case, we're going to use our requested projects. Now, I've got a whole series of videos on using this for Power Apps. If you want to check those out and see how you can do the same process using a Power App, I've got the link for that up in the right-hand corner of this video. Go ahead and click that, and then you can watch the series of videos. I've got a playlist specifically for it that covers a lot of different aspects of how you would use this using a Power App. But you would need to have a SharePoint list. Now, in the case of this particular SharePoint list, we have a lot of different fields. We've got a lot of text fields, and then we've got some choice fields, and we've got a multi-select field. We've got our person locator field. So we've got a lot of different field types in here that we can use as part of this process to show how this works. So that's step one, is to have your SharePoint list prepared. Now, in the case of a lot of people out there, we're probably all aware that InfoPath Forms are going away. And one of the common questions that I get all the time is, hey, we've been exporting all these InfoPath Forms. How do we use these after InfoPath goes away? And this video is great for that. It'll kind of explain it. The great news about InfoPath going away is that you've still got your SharePoint list with all the data. So all you need to do is create an automation. If you wanted to, say, convert it over to a PDF, you can do that very easily just by following this video, or maybe you watch the Power Apps videos and explains how to do this as well. You can use this approach for that as well, because the InfoPath forms that you exported, they're not going to be opened. You're not going to be able to open those after this process of getting rid of InfoPath is complete. So this has been kind of that common question out there. The underlying data's there, you just can't open the form that you might have exported in the past. I know this is a big issue in the federal government because a lot of people were records management, had to export all these different InfoPath forms. They didn't want to use a system of records of basically a SharePoint list, so they exported it and that became their record essentially. Now, there are third-party automations out there also that will help resolve this process out there. Again, every time Microsoft gets rid of a feature, there's always a company that creates some sort of a third-party process to resolve some of these issues for commercial or federal government employees. So there are different options out there for how you can do this. And some of the third-party options are actually pretty good for how you can switch these InfoPath forms over to, say, a PDF document or something like that. But this process will work for that also. Now, the next part we need is a Microsoft Word document. So let's go ahead and open up our Word document. Now, here's the Word document I created as part of the Power App series. It's going to work the exact same way. It works pretty much the same way whether you're using a Power App or if you're using right off of the SharePoint list. And essentially what it is we've got our titles, so all of our different field titles here, and then we've got our dynamic content that's going to be populated from our SharePoint list here. Now, adding this is very easy. You just go to the developer option up here. If you don't see this, you can go into your settings and you can turn on the developer menu item here so you can see all these different developer options. And the specific ones that you're looking for are these controls over here. Now, most of your controls are going to be fine just using a plain text control, which is everything on here is just using that. But you do have some other options in here. So if you've got like rich text, for example, then you'd want to use the rich text control here so you can get that bold and all the different things that are inside your SharePoint list. In this case, we don't have that field on our SharePoint list, but pretty much everything else from our SharePoint list will just work fine with a plain text field. And all you do is you add it in here. And then after you've added your field in there, you go to the properties here and you put a title. Now, this is what's going to show up in your automation. So you want to make sure that you can identify what field specifically you're working with. You don't necessarily need a tag. So if you don't want to put the tag in there, you don't have to put that in there. I like to put both just for ease and consistency. Makes it a little bit easier. And then the last thing I usually do is I type this in there. Again, you don't have to do that either. So if you don't, it's not going to hurt anything. In this case, this one here, I didn't type it in there, and that's just as an example to say, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, but it can be a little bit easier when you're looking at these things to see which one's your dynamic content based on that as well. And then you're also going to want to take a look at your spacing. If you've got fields that are really, really big, it is going to move everything down. So in theory, you could have something that's going to cross the page here, and you might want to kind of take a look at the design of this for your page layouts as well, where you want things to be. But that's all you have to do is kind of set up this Microsoft Word document, and then you just save it as a docx file. It doesn't have to be saved as a template file. It can just be a docx file if you want. It doesn't really matter. And then you're going to put it inside of a SharePoint document library. So that's the next step that we have to take a look at. So let's go take a look at our document library. Now here's the document library. And again, this was all built as part of the Power App approach. But what I usually call a document library, I don't usually use the out-of-the-box documents. I create a separate document library just for the template processing. And then you create a folder in here. Just keep in mind you have to know the pathway essentially for this. And I'll explain that when we get to the automation process. But what I usually recommend is creating a separate document library where all your templates get stored and processed from, and then create a folder in here. And all we did was drop that template in here. And again, September 12th, so we're about a month later. Again, I did all this as part of that Power video also. So it's the exact same process. It's just handled a little bit differently using the SharePoint as the trigger instead of the Power App. But all you need to do is drop that file in here. Now you can do some other folders. For example, if you want to put your temp files in a different folder, you can do that also. In this video, we're actually going to delete those temp files. So we're only ever going to have our templates in here anyway. So as part of this process, I'm just going to delete those. But what you could do is create like a temp file processing thing just to make it a little bit more clean, but we're just going to delete them anyway. So I don't worry about that as part of this video. Now we're ready to create our automation. So let's go back to our SharePoint list. Now you don't have to do it this way from the SharePoint list. You could also just go into Power Automate and do it that way. Now to create it, all we have to do is go up to the integrate option here, Power Automate, and create a flow. And again, I always bypass all this stuff, so I'll see your flows, and then I'm going to create a new flow, and I'm going to do an automated cloud flow. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to build this from scratch the way that I want to inside of this flow once we get it created. Now we're going to add our trigger, and in this case, it's going to be a SharePoint trigger. So let's go find our SharePoint options here. And then we're going to do for a selected item. So let's select our for selected item trigger here. And then we're going to find our portal. And then we're going to find our SharePoint list. And then we're going to add another option in here. Now, when you select an item, you don't always get all the field properties from this. So you're not going to get everything that you need from this most times. And this is kind of the same thing with Power Apps as well. Whenever you're relying on triggers from the Power Apps, whatever you send through will come through the V2 connector. Everything else, you're probably going to have to use a get item or something like that to get the information. So let's go ahead and find our SharePoint option here, and let's get the entire item that we want. So let's go down and find get item. So we'll select our get item option here, and then it'll be our SharePoint list again. So we'll find all the different settings, requested projects. Now for the unique ID, we're just going to use our dynamic content here, because essentially this is our selected item. All we want is the rest of the information for this. Now, one additional thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to have to process the multi-selects. Multi-selects have to be processed a certain way, and we're going to do that using a variable. So let's go ahead and type in variable here. And we're going to initialize a variable. Now for our variable name, let's go ahead and call it var impact areas. That's our multi-select column. And then let's go ahead and do a string variable here. And then let's go ahead and do another variable. Now we want to append to a string variable. And go ahead and select this. Now our dynamic content is going to be our impact area. So let's go ahead and search for our impact area value here. And you'll notice that it's got a for each. And essentially what we're doing is for each of the selected items, it's going to go through and append that variable in here. Now we want to have a comma and a space to delineate between these. You could use a semicolon also, whatever you prefer. A lot of times I just use a comma, but it could be a semicolon, it could be a colon, whatever works for you. Dashes, hyphens, pretty much anything can be typed in here. So don't feel like you have to follow this exact approach here. If you don't want to have a comma and a space, you can use something else. But we do want to have the value added in here. And what that's going to do is give us the list of options in a comma delimited option. So it's going to populate that Microsoft Word document in that way. All right, so now we need to get our Word template. So let's go ahead and find our Word template and type in Word, and that usually pops it up here. Populate a Microsoft Word template. And we're going to find the template that we created. Again, that's going to be our portal here. So let's go ahead and select that. and then our document library. And then again, that'll be our template processing. Now let's go ahead and select our file. And there is our template document. Now let's go ahead and show all, and we've got all of our different options. Now this is actually one of those things I like better about the old designer is I don't have to click anything. It just automatically shows me all the different options here. I prefer that over having to click anything. I think it's a little bit more concise, a little more efficient if it just kind of shows everything. All right, so now all I have to do is map all of our stuff from our Git items into our urgency here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll select our Git item, and then we'll do urgency. And it'll be our value here. And then we'll do the same thing for our risk level. All right, I've pretty much done everything for the entries except for the impact areas. I wanted to explain this here. So we're going to go ahead and select our var impact areas. And then for our requester, in this particular list, I didn't use a separate field for that. So we're just going to go with the created by for this. And then you've got options of whether you want the display name or the email. And for this one, we're just going to use our created by display name. You could also put them together if you wanted to have, say, the name followed by the email address. You have different options for how you can handle this. But all that information, whenever you use a created by or a person column or something like that, you've got all of these different options to choose from. And in this case, we're just going to choose our display name here. All right, next step, let's go ahead and add another option here for creating the file. So type in create file here, and we'll see that we've got our SharePoint create file option. And we'll go find our site again. And for our folder, let's go ahead and find our template processing folder. And we just want to save that in there. Now the file name, we're going to use our dynamic content. So let's start with the title. And then we'll add a hyphen, ID number, and then we'll find our ID here. We want to make sure it's going to be unique. Now I'm going to show you how you can overwrite a previously moved document. So we're actually going to do a couple extra steps in here so that we can plan for the potential of saving this a couple different times. And let's go ahead and do our approval status. So type in status, and then we're going to go ahead and close this off. What's likely to change as you export this, maybe somebody asks you for a copy of it initially where it's still being worked and it's not in a final status. So you've created a document that has the status. Maybe you have to keep all those records. Now, if you don't want to and you just want to overwrite whatever the file was, you would keep this a little bit more basic. So your title, your ID, maybe you add in there who it was created by or requested by. So you can kind of configure how you want this to work. But depending on what you come up with, don't forget to add our file extension on there. If you don't put that in there, you're just going to get kind of a no extension file. So you have to add that in there. Now for our file content, let's go ahead and find our dynamic content, and it's going to be our Microsoft Word document. So let's go ahead and save this. So now what's going to happen when we do this is it's going to create a file, Microsoft Word document, with the information that we provided to it at this location. And again, I mentioned that we're not going to keep it there. We're going to delete this file later on. So we're going to move this also. So let's go ahead and save now. So we'll go ahead and call this the SharePoint project request to document. And let's go ahead and save. Now, while this is saving, why do I save now? If there's some sort of a issue later on, I want to make sure that I've saved it at where it's reasonably expected to have no problems. And at this point, we haven't really gotten anything too crazy. So I expect that we probably won't have any issues, but you could have also saved at any point in here. I know somebody that likes to save after each step. That way that if they have any kind of problems with the step, they can always remove it and kind of start over, or they can always go back to the last save point, depending on what the problem happens to be. Sometimes when you copy steps, for example, you end up with an issue that really can't be fixed other than to just delete it or roll it back to the previous save point. Now let's go ahead and take this opportunity to test this and see how we're doing. So let's go back to our SharePoint list. Now let's go ahead and try it with our cloud migration here. And we'll go up to our automate. We'll go to our flows. And then we're going to see our SharePoint project request to document. So let's go ahead and select it. And hit continue. And run the flow. All right, let's go to our document library and see what happened. All right, so in our document library, we see that the document was created. Let's go ahead and open this up so we can see what it looks like. And we can see that all the information is in here. The requester, my name was in there, what it was, all the information is here, and everything looks good. We do have a little bit of that issue I was mentioning about your page and making sure that the page setups are the way that you want them to be. So in this case, I would probably want to move the information a little bit lower down the page. Those are all kind of things you can do in your own setup. I'm not going to focus a lot of time on that, but yeah, it's looking pretty good. I think that we have everything that we're looking for. Everything looks like it was put in here. We've got our impact areas. Now we only selected one, so we're not seeing more than one option here. You can also adjust this to get rid of the comma so that, for example, if you've only got one option or you don't want a comma on the end of it, you can also set it up that way also. Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how you do a lot of this stuff, but you could also add spaces here. You know, these are all fine-tuning things that you would do on this process. We've got a good date formatted. We're not getting a lot of extra gobbledygook that we need to add some date formatting to. So I think this is looking pretty good. Now, if this is all you wanted to do, this would be a success. We have essentially created a document, a Microsoft Word document, inside of a folder. Let's go ahead and close this off. Now, what are some of the problems? Now, I mentioned what happens if you run the flow a second time? Well, if you run it again, it's going to error out because you've already got this file in here. So how do we fix that? How do we make sure that we can overwrite this file should we want to do that? Now, maybe you don't want to overwrite it and you want to keep each version. You could put the date and time of the flow being run in here as well as dynamic content. So every time you run the flow, it's going to add today's date and time in there. And that'll keep this as being unique to this. As long as they don't run it several times per minute, it's not going to have any kind of an error. So that would make it so you could run this and have versions of each one of these as well. But in this particular instance, we're just going to worry about keeping the current version and moving it over, or at least the current version with this particular status, deferred. This could eventually be, run, and then maybe it's going to have a completion down the road. So every time you run this, you would have a document for each one of those. But these are all the different things you can kind of think through for your process. But I'm going to show you how to handle this for deleting the previous one and not keeping it here. And then we're also going to clean it up and delete this. And we're also going to take a look at how do we change this into a PDF file. All right, so the next step we need to do before we make any changes to our automation though, is where do we want to put this file when we move it? In this case, we're going to use the documents folder, and I've created a folder for project requests. This is where we're going to store these files in this folder here. Now let's go work on our automation. All right, so let's add another step in here. And again, it's going to be a SharePoint. So let's go down here and find our SharePoint options. And now what we're going to do is get file properties. So let's go ahead and select get file properties here. And let's go ahead and find our portal and our library where we saved the file. So we saved it in template processing. And let's find our item ID. So that will be getting all of our file properties, the file name with the extension and all that kind of information from here. All right, let's go ahead and add another step in here. And this one's going to be a Word document. Again, we're going to convert our Word document to a PDF. So convert Word document to PDF here. And let's find our portal and our document again. And let's go ahead and add dynamic content. And this will be our file name with extension. And then we're going to have to create a file again. But before that, let's go ahead and change this one. So this is going to be our Word document. So when we create this one, it's going to be our PDF document. And again, our site address is the same. And let's go ahead and find our folder path. It's going to be in our template processing. And then our file name is going to be the same. And actually we can just kind of come from here and we'll just go ahead and copy this and paste that in there. And then our file content is going to be our convert Word document to PDF. And let's go ahead and change this to be our PDF document. All right, now we got to make one more change here because we're actually working on the PDF. So we want to make sure we put PDF in the extension here. All right, now we're ready to move our files. So we've created both files. Let's go ahead and move them. So let's find our move file. And for our site address, we'll go ahead and select that. And then the file to move, we'll use dynamic content. And we'll go down to our create file. And we want to do the body ID for this one. And then our destination is going to be the same. And in this case, we'll take our shared documents folder and we'll put it in the project requests. And here's where we get to choose what happens. So do we want it to fail, move with a different name, or replace? And in this case, we're just going to say replace, so it'll overwrite if there's anything already there. And we'll go ahead and change the name of this to be our Microsoft Word. And let's go ahead and add another one here. And let's be a new file. And for this one, let's go ahead and find our site. And the file to move will be our dynamic content again. And we'll do our PDF at this point. And our destination is the same portal. And then our folder is going to be our shared documents, project request. And again, we'll do replace. And this one will be our PDF document. Now, because we're moving the file, we don't actually have to do any kind of delete actions. It's already being moved, so there's no file to delete. Let's go ahead and save. All right, let's go ahead and go to our SharePoint portal and try this out. Now, instead of the cloud migration, let's go ahead and choose this remote work toolkit so we can try it with something different here. And we'll go up to our automate, and we'll go to flows, and then we'll go ahead and try this out. So let's go ahead and hit the continue when it pops up here and run flow. All right, let's go to our document library and see if the files were created. And as we can see, both files have been created in our project request area. And let's go look at our template folder and see if there's any files there. And as we can see, there are no files here. So our flow ran perfectly, no problems. Everything looks good. Let's go check out the actual files now. So if we go ahead and open up our remote work toolkit ID number 2, we can see how this looks. And again, I would go through and adjust this so that it's a little bit further down. It's by accident happens to not overline with this one. We already saw that it can overwrite that or be on top of it just because of how I've got it set up there. Those are all fine tuning things. You might want to bold the headers here and that kind of stuff. So those are all things you can kind of fine tune. But you can see the difference between this one and the previous one where it takes up a lot more screen real estate with this particular version. And as we can see, our impact areas, now we've got a bunch of options here. So this is essentially how it's going to look. And again, we can modify to not have that comma at the end if we wanted that as well. But I think we're looking pretty good. Now that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you found the content helpful. Again, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe if you find this content helpful or if you think that I'm covering the kinds of stuff that you're looking for. It'll help the channel grow. Right now, about 650 subscribers, and you don't even get paid by YouTube until you hit 1,000. So that's kind of my first goal is let's try to get to 1,000 and then we'll continue to try to grow this channel. But don't forget to hit that like and subscribe to really kind of help the channel grow. All right, until next time.